Hey folks, welcome. Happy day 3 of this week's Pastor's Devotional, and we are using our prayer ministry prayer calendar. If you don't have a copy of the prayer calendar, well, there's a couple ways it comes out right now. One, if you're on our physical mailing list, you get a copy of a paper version of our newsletter, The Pathway. It's inserted in that. If you don't get that and you would like to, call the church office and we're happy to put you on that mailing list. Or you can get an electronic copy of the Pathway. Always, it's on our website, fumccv.org. Then navigate to the Contact Us at the top right. There a menu will drop down, Stay Connected. Right there, you can get all the digital versions of the Pathway and also sign up to have the Pathway emailed to you. So all of that, we are working through core principles and working through some parables. So the parable of the day is, again, one of my favorites, the parable of the sower, Mark chapter 4, verse 1 through 8. Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. I'm going to read it. As we're reading it together, we want to think, what is the core principle? There's probably more than one, but a core principle that is taught about our faith in this parable. Again, Jesus began to teach beside the sea. Such a very large crowd gathered around him that he got into a boat on the sea and sat there. While the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land, he began to teach them many things in parables. And in his teaching, he said to them, "Listen. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold. And he said, let anyone with ears to hear listen." All right, now this passage is a preacher's paradise because there are so many different analogies and metaphors and similes that you can create. So much language that you can use. So we could be the sower, and what we're sowing are seeds of faith and blessings out of our lives. Or God could be the sower. We could be the seed that God is throwing us out into the world that we might grow and prosper and bear fruit in other people's lives. We could be the sower, and what we're sowing is the values of God. That could be the seed. We could be the soil, and how we live our spiritual lives determines whether, when the values of God can actually take root in our lives and can be a blessing to others. So, I mean, there is just so many different ways of understanding this passage. And as I said, it's a preacher's paradise. It's a fun passage to teach on. It's a fun passage to preach about because there's so many different ways that you can use it to help illuminate our spiritual life. So what is the core principle? What is a core principle? Well, let me tell you the one that, as I said earlier, there's probably many that you can think of that would grow out of this passage. Let me tell you the one that matters to me from this passage about the core principle. And that would be that the core principle is that God is extravagant with grace. That God is extravagant with grace. Maybe even reckless, generous, abundant, all of that, right? The sower is going out, and the sower is just throwing seed wherever. Now, you would think that the sower would be more disciplined than that. Here's the good soil. Let me throw the seed in where the good soil is. But that's not what the sower does. The sower throws the seed everywhere, and it lands on all of these different kinds of soil. And I think this is a passage about God's grace. And that God's grace is not, it's not earned by us. So we don't get grace if we're the good soil and we've prayed and we've studied and we've gone to church and we've served other people. Then, we're the really good sort of rich soil where the word of God can really take root and the values of God. And so then God carefully gives the grace to those in the good soil. No, God gives it everywhere. So it's not earned. It's not given to the good and right and faithful people more than it's given to other people. It's not deserved because there are times in which we might be the good soil and we've done good. And then there's other times where we're like that road, we're hard and coarse, or we're like the thorny soil or the rocks. There's other times where we've not done good, and still we get the seed of God's grace sown into our lives. So it's not something that we earn. It's not something that is given more to some than others. It's not something that is deserved. It's just given extravagantly, liberally to everyone, which is to say, it's not, God's grace is not a response to us. God's grace is an invitation that for us to live more godly. So if you're the good soil, the grace is an invitation for you to continue being the good soil and to be even better soil. If you're the bad soil, if you're the road, you're the rocks, you're the thorn, then God's grace is given to you as an invitation to cease that life and to find a different way. The grace is first. It's not a result of what we have done. Grace is a result of God's loving, merciful compassion upon us. God's grace is a result of God's desire to grow us back into the image of God. And so it's an invitation, and it's extravagant, always bountiful, that God shares it. So for me, that would be the core principle out of this passage. I'm sure there's some others that you could think of and that might be important, and I invite you to spend some time thinking about that and extrapolating what are the core principles of this faith tradition out of this story. And my hope and my prayer is that you feel that extravagant grace on this day. It might be a day in which you especially need it, and might you rest in the grace of God. It might be a day in which you don't particularly need it, and here it's going to show up in an extravagant way, and it's going to move you forward in some part of your life. So might you know the extravagance of God's grace on this day. God bless you.